records were made public before the hearing. This is fuzzy math. My colleagues calibrate their phony 6% figure on two inaccurate numbers. First, their 6% figure counts the estimated page count by career archivists at the National Archives. We received 100% of the documents we requested from Judge Kavanaugh's time as an executive branch lawyer. And while we may have received 99% of Justice Kagan's White House records, we received 0 records from her most relevant legal service as a Solicitor General, the federal government's top Supreme Court advocate. We received much less than 99% of her records as a lawyer. And we didn't receive 60,000 emails from Justice Kagan, so 99% is an overestimate. And even though we never received them, Justice Kagan's Solicitor General records were much more needed at the time because Kagan was a blank slate as a judge. Instead, unlike Judge Kavanaugh, with his 12 years of judicial service and over 10,000 pages of judicial writings on the nation's most important federal circuit court, Justice Kagan had 0 years of judicial service and 0 pages of judicial writing before her appointment to the highest court. Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin my opening statement, I just wanted to respond to just a few things. One, none of that takes away from the fact that 42,000 documents were dumped on us last night. And I don't think anyone would go to trial and allow a trial to go forward or allow a case to go forward if one side got 42,000 documents the night before and the other side, and you can't simply review them. As pointed out by Senator Whitehouse, you'd have to review 7,000 documents every hour. That happened last night.
Let me respond without taking time away from you.
Thank you.
You Democrats got exactly the same amount of money we did.
Which have been challenged and undermined. Today, our democracy faces threats that we never would have believed would be occurring not that long ago. Our intelligence agencies agree that a foreign adversary attempted to interfere in our most recent election, and it's happening again. In the words of the President's Director of National Intelligence, the lights are blinking red. There is an extensive ongoing investigation by a special counsel. The president's private lawyer and campaign chairman have been found guilty of multiple federal crimes. The man appointed as special counsel in this investigation, a man who has served with distinction under presidents from both parties, has been under siege. The dedicated public servants who work in our Justice Department, including the Attorney General and the FBI, have been subjected to repeated threats and have had their work politicized and their motives questioned. In fact, just this past authority to remove a special counsel. I wrote in Federalist 47, the accumulation of fraud from credit cards acts on the rule of law in our justice system over the past year. That morning, that behind every single case, there was a story and there was a person, no matter how small. Each and every decision the judge made that day affected that person's life. And I noticed how often he had to make gut decisions and had to take account of what his decisions would mean for that person and his or her family. This week I remembered that day, and I remembered I had written an essay about it at the ripe old age of 17. I went back and looked at what I had said. It is something that I still believe today, and that is that to be part of an imperfect system, to have a chance to better that system, was and is a cause worth fighting for, a job worth doing. Our government is far from perfect, Judge, nor is our legal system, but we are at a crossroads in our nation's history where we must make a choice. Are we going to dedicate ourselves to improving our democracy, improving our justice system, or not? The question we are being asked to address in this hearing, among others, is whether this judge, at this time in our history, will administer the law with equal justice as it applies to all citizens, regardless of if they live in a poor neighborhood or a rich neighborhood, or if they live in a small house or the White House. Our country needs a Supreme Court justice who will better our legal system, a justice who will serve as a check.
Ashley, congratulations and condolences. This process has to stink. I'm glad your daughters could get out of the room, and I hope they still get the free day from school. Let's do some good news, bad news. The bad news first. Judge, since your nomination in July, you've been accused of hating women, hating children, hating clean air, wanting dirty water. You've been declared a quote-unquote 20 months in America. Senator Klobuchar's right. The comments from the White House yesterday talk about it now. Is that this transfer of power is even rowdy because men decide for incumbency. And so at the end of the day, a lot of the power leaves a lot of people wondering who's looking out for me. And that brings us to the third point. The Supreme Court becomes our substitute political battleground. It's only 9 people. You can know them, you can demonize them, you can try to make them messiahs. But ultimately, because people can't navigate their way through the bureaucracy, they turn to the Supreme Court looking for politics. And knowing that our elected officials no longer care enough to do the hard work of reasoning through the places where we differ and deciding to shroud our power at times, it means that we look for 9 justices to be super legislators. We look for 9 justices to try to right the wrongs from other places in the process. When people talk about wanting to have empathy from their justices, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about trying to make the justices do something that the Congress refuses to do as it constantly abdicates its responsibility. The hyperventilating that we see in this process and the way that today's hearing started with 90 minutes of theatrics that are pre-planned with certain members of the other side here, it shows us a system that is wildly out of whack. And thus a fourth and final point. The solution here is not to try to find judges who will be policymakers. The solution is not to try to turn the Supreme Court into an election battle for TV. The solution is to restore a proper constitutional order with a balance of powers. We need Schoolhouse Rock back. We need a Congress that writes laws and then stands before the people and suffers the consequences and gets to go back to our own Mount Vernon if that's what the electors decide. We need an executive branch that has a humble view of its job as enforcing the law, not trying to write laws in the Congress's absence. And we need a judiciary that tries to apply written laws to facts and cases that are actually before it. This is the elegant and the fair process that the founders created. It's the process where the people who are elected, 2 and 6 years in this institution, 4 years in the executive branch, can be fired because the justices and the judges, the men and women who serve America's people by wearing black robes, they're insulated from politics. This is why we talk about an independent judiciary. This is why they wear robes. This is why we shouldn't talk about Republican and Democratic judges and justices. This is why we say justice is blind. This is why we give judges lifetime tenure. And this is why this is the last job interview Brett Kavanaugh will ever have. Because he's going to a job where he's not supposed to be a super legislator. So the question before us today is not what does Brett Kavanaugh think 11 years ago on some policy matter. The question before us is whether or not he has the temperament and the character to take his policy views and his political preferences and put them in a box marked irrelevant and set it aside every morning when he puts on the black robe. The question is, does he have the character and temperament to do that? If you don't think he does, vote no. But if you think he does, stop the charades. Because at the end of the day, I think all of us know that Brett Kavanaugh understands his job isn't to rewrite laws as he wishes they were. He understands that he's not being interviewed to be a super legislator. He understands that his job isn't to seek popularity. His job is to be fair and dispassionate. It is not to exercise empathy. It is to follow written laws. Contrary to the onion-like smears that we hear outside, Judge Kavanaugh doesn't hate women and children. Judge Kavanaugh doesn't lust after dirty water and stinky air. No, looking at his record, it seems to me that what he actually dislikes are legislators that are too lazy and too risk-averse to do our actual jobs. It seems to me that if you read his 300-plus opinions, what his opinions reveal to me is a dissatisfaction. I think he would argue a constitutionally compelled dissatisfaction with power-hungry executive branch bureaucrats doing our job when we fail to do it. And in this view, I think he's aligned with the founders. For our Constitution places power not in the hands of this city's bureaucracy, which can't be fired, but our Constitution places the policy-making power in the 535 of our hands because the voters can hire and fire us. And if the voters are going to retain their power, they need a legislature that's responsive to politics, not a judiciary that's responsive to politics. It seems to me that Judge Kavanaugh is ready to do his job. The question for us is whether we're ready to do our job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, the example I always use to back up what Senator Sass says about Congress not doing this job and delegating too much is the Obamacare legislation that was 2,700 pages, and there was 1,693 delegations of authority to bureaucrats to write regulations because Congress didn't know how to reorganize health care. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Judge Kavanaugh. Welcome to you and to your family and to your friends who are here. As you know well, we went to the same law. The president might be above the law on his confirmation. Firm to the court in one of the most concerningly partisan processes in Senate history, and only after the majority deployed the nuclear option to end the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations. This brings us, Judge, to today and your nomination. When Justice Kennedy announced his retirement, I once again called the White House and urged through White House counsel that President Trump consider selecting someone for the seat who could win broad support from both sides of the aisle. And Judge Kavanaugh, I'm concerned you may not be that nominee. Your record prior to joining the bench places you in the midst of some of the most pitched and partisan battles in our lifetimes. From Ken Starr's investigation of President Clinton to the 2000 election recount to the controversies of the Bush administration, including surveillance, torture, access to justice, and the culture wars. So, Judge, it's critical that this leads to a difficult but important question, which is what might President Trump or the majority be trying to hide? Mr. Chairman, I want to make an appeal to work together to restore the integrity of this committee. We are better than this process. We are better than proceeding with a nominee without engaging in a full and a transparent process. This committee is failing the American people by proceeding in this way, and I fully support the motions made by my colleagues earlier in this hearing and regret that we proceeded without observing the rules of this committee. That said, Judge Kavanaugh, I have reviewed the parts of your record that I've been able to access and what I've been able to see from available speeches, writings, and decisions, and I have to say it troubles me. While serving on the bench, you've dissented at a higher rate than any circuit judge elevated to the Supreme Court since 1980, and that includes Judge Bork. Your dissents reveal some views and positions that fall well outside and a dangerously unaccountable president at the very time when we are most in need of checks and balances. I want to pause for a moment on this last point because the context of your nomination troubles me the most. In reviewing your records, Judge, you've questioned the lawfulness of United States v. Nixon, an historic decision in which a unanimous court said the president had to comply with a grand jury subpoena. You've questioned the correctness of Morrison v. Olson, a 30-year-old precedent holding that Congress can create an independent counsel with the authority to investigate the president, who is produced and available to this committee and the American people, and I encourage you to do this. There's also members of both parties who have not stated how they will vote on your nomination, and I urge you to answer our questions about in this country. Our courts, and in particular our Supreme Court, must be a bulwark against unprecedented violations of law, deprivations of freedom, and abuses of power by anyone, including our president. No one said it better than our former colleague, Senator McCain, who once asked about America, what makes us exceptional? Is it our wealth, our natural resources, our military power, our big and bountiful country? No, it's our founding ideals and our fidelity to them and our conduct in the world. They are the source of our wealth and power, that we live under the rule of law. That enables us to face threats with confidence that our values make us stronger than our enemies. Judge Kavanaugh, we're here to determine whether you would uphold or undermine those founding ideals and the rule of law. We're here to determine whether you would continue in the traditions of the court or transform it into a body more conservative than a majority of Americans. We're here to determine whether your confirmation would compromise or undermine the legitimacy of the court itself. I urge you to answer our questions and to confront these significant challenges. These are weighty questions, and the American people deserve real answers. Thank you, and I look forward to your testimony.